Welcome to the Quick Trip from the Psychedelic Support Network, where we hear expert answers to questions about psychedelic medicine and mental health. Emily Williams, MD, is a psychiatrist, researcher, and educator based in San Francisco, California. She is an ardent advocate for psychedelic medicine and has worked on multiple clinical trials investigating psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, including both MDMA and psilocybin. She is a member of the clinical research team for the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, at the San Francisco Insight and Integration Center. Additionally, Emily has a private practice in San Francisco and is an attending psychiatrist at the University of California, San Francisco, and Zuckerberg SF General Hospital in Psychiatric Emergency Services. She holds multiple mentorship and teaching roles, including at the California Institute of Integral Studies in the Center for Psychedelic Therapies and Research and the School of Consciousness and Transformation. I'd love to welcome Dr. Emily Willow to join us on the Quick Trip. Welcome, Dr. Willow.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I would love to jump in and get to ask you a little bit about your experience as a psychiatrist who has worked on clinical trials for psychedelics and who also offers CAP, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which is currently one of the only psychedelics offered in the United States outside of clinical trials. I wondered if you could tell us more about what it's like to be a psychiatrist who does psychedelic work, especially in this pre-legalization moment that we're moving through right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're really in an interesting moment between this kind of pre-legalization of psychedelic medicines, while also in this kind of explosion of popular media articles. There are, blogs and podcasts and New York Times articles and Today Show pieces on psychedelic medicine. So there's a lot of interest in the kind of general population, and we don't really have the ability to meet that need fully. So it's a really kind of interesting moment, especially I think following Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. There was a lot of interest that came out of that book because it targeted maybe a different population of people than were previously interested in psychedelics, which I think was kind of the point of his exploration in that book. I've gotten a lot of new patient inquiries from people specifically who read Michael Pollan's book and have been suffering with depression and PTSD or anxiety, and haven't felt met by the treatments that they that are currently being offered. So I work with a lot of people at times kind of managing expectations because we are pre-legalization of psilocybin assisted psychotherapy or MDMA assisted psychotherapy. That's not something that I can offer, unfortunately. So sometimes it's managing the expectations of people who are coming to see me who maybe specifically want that sort of treatment. But the kind of nice thing is that we do have ketamine assisted psychotherapy available now, and it's very beneficial for a variety of different mental health disorders and issues. Specifically depression, there's been a lot more research into that, but I also, use ketamine assisted psychotherapy to treat anxiety and, issues dealing with trauma and PTSD, and also just kind of deepening the psychotherapeutic process, helping to understand yourself more.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm so grateful we do, as you said, have these tools now that can help for a wide range of conditions, even as we're seeing that there's more research coming about how we'll have more options down the road. What you were just sharing brought to mind a question that I just came up with, but I'm wondering if you've encountered, I've heard from some ketamine practitioners who work with ketamine that sometimes the language around psychedelics is kind of intimidating to some of their patients or potential clients, and so they sometimes work to kind of balance what way they present these medicines. And I know ketamine is a little bit different. Some people will think of ketamine as a longstanding anesthetic, and you hear maybe psilocybin or LSD, and you have more connotations of kind of a more psychedelic space. I wonder if you have noticed anything with how it needs to be packaged so that patients feel comfortable interacting with these options.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I definitely have encountered, really a wide range of people who are seeking psychedelic treatment. I think that some people seek me out specifically because I have a connection with UCSF. I'm a staff psychiatrist there and work in the psych emergency department. And so there's definitely the folks who maybe feel a little more comfortable with the medicalization aspect of it. And I think that kind of speaks to also, where we are in this psychedelic movement. The people who would benefit from having that kind of medical container might not benefit from, just, decriminalization or, recreational legalization of psychedelics. So we can kind of meet the needs of a wide range of folks. But I definitely, my general approach to working with patients is to meet them where they are. And so for people who are maybe more hesitant about psychedelics in general, and maybe are more comfortable with ketamine because it's, approved and, has this long history of use in a kind of medical context, using language that is more in line with that kind of Western medical model can be helpful. But I also, because of my training, because of my background, I also have the ability to talk about things on maybe like the other end of the spectrum, like transpersonal experiences, and kind of the kind of archetypal symbolic nature of these experiences, which is also very important. But I think the key is meeting the patient where they are and being able to kind of move with that and be flexible.
Thank you. I really, appreciate that you are a practitioner who can really hold all the sides of this work, who can speak from the medical lens and the transpersonal. And it feels like we need those experiences to be held together, since they are, they're part and parcel with it. We know mystical experience as well as the treatment itself are both working for healing. So it's wonderful to be able to hold both parts of that.
Yeah.
I'd love to get to ask you a little bit more about harm reduction. So harm reduction is a practice that helps reduce the negative effects of substance use. And when it comes to psychedelics, harm reduction often takes into account biological and psychological factors. I know that harm reduction is something you're connected with, and I wonder if you could share more about how you use a harm reduction approach to support the people you work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some of my early experience with psychedelics was working on the Zendo project, which is a offshoot of, or kind of under the umbrella of MAPS, the MDMA assisted psychotherapy research organization. But that was a service that provided psychedelic harm reduction at festivals like Burning Man and Symbiosis. So that was where I got a lot of my experience in working with people in altered states and, kind of supporting that process. Because we're in this pre-legalization of psychedelic medicine space as a licensed provider, it's really important to hold a harm reduction approach, among other reasons. But I can't legally recommend that someone use psychedelic medicines on their own, but I can use a harm reduction model that acknowledges that psychedelic use is a part of our society, like it happens, and holding a non-judgmental container for that space, for that process, is really kind of where, like, how I approach working with patients who are using psychedelics recreationally. In psychiatry, in our training, we're often trained that psychedelic use is a substance use disorder. And while that can be true, I don't necessarily agree with that as a blanket generalization for all psychedelic use. So kind of holding a more non-judgmental stance allows people to, speak more freely about their use. I think a lot of patients don't feel safe to share because of the legality of it. So kind of from the outset, being more harm reduction oriented, I think makes it easier to give the patients the treatment that they need.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. I think it's so important, especially given, this history of these medicines being forced underground and kind of out of the eye where we could learn more about them.
Mm-hmm.
And then folks are interacting with them in a space where they may need to be affirmed to know that they, these things come with benefits and they come with some risks. And so how do we incorporate that when we're talking about meeting someone where they are for their own healing? Yeah, I really appreciate that. I know that the clinical trials are one of the things that is helping us to move more towards legalization and more understanding about how these medicines work. You currently work on the phase 3 MDMA for PTSD trials sponsored by MAPS. And I know these trials are a key step in the process towards proving that MDMA is effective for treating PTSD and helping MDMA to clear legal barriers in order to increase access. Many of the folks who are connected with the Psychedelic Support Network have lots of questions and want to know more about clinical trials. So I'd love to ask you, what is it like for you to work on a clinical trial, and what do you imagine the impact of this trial will be in the long term?
Yeah. So yeah, as you said, this phase 3 clinical trial is a real keystone, stepping stone into where we go next. This is the first phase 3 clinical trial of a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy ever. So if we do have FDA approval, we'll be kind of stepping into a brave new world of psychedelic medicine that's legal. I think to your question about what it's like, to be honest, it feels like a dream. When I was in medical school, so this was a little over 10 years ago, I first learned about the work that MAPS was doing, and happened to be going to medical school in the same city that one of the first phase 2 MDMA assisted psychotherapy clinical trials was being conducted by Michael and Annie Mithofer, and had the amazing opportunity to meet them at that time. And it was really fascinating to contrast, to kind of hold what I was learning in medical school, in that kind of traditional Western medical model of treatment, and contrast that with the healing that I was witnessing, in seeing what Michael and Annie were doing at that time, working with MDMA, and that really shifted what my kind of personal trajectory, and I kind of in that moment decided that I wanted to pursue being a psychiatrist and working with MAPS and making a career from working with psychedelic medicines. And at that time, it was not as widely accepted as it is now. So it's been what it sometimes feels like a long road, but to be in this moment where there's they're talking about psychedelic medicine on Fox News and on the Today Show and in the New York Times. It's a really exciting moment to be a part of this, and to be a part of this movement that's bringing real healing to people that are really suffering, is so important to me, and makes this work feel very meaningful. And I'm just honored to be a part of it.
I'm so grateful that there is so much work that the rest of the community gets to stand on your shoulders and the shoulders of other practitioners who saw these openings and were drawn to this work well before it was in the mainstream and on every headline. And I'm grateful that we get to, we're not stepping into the first trials at this point in 2021. We're well on our way, and it's incredible. There's so many visionaries who had the foresight to really understand the healing that could be possible for folks. And you are a huge part of that. So I'm just grateful that I get to thank you from myself and from many other people in the community.
Thank you.
And very hopeful for the results of these stage 3 trials. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you also worked on the MAPS clinical trial focused on using MDMA to address end-of-life anxiety in people who have a terminal diagnosis. This is definitely a whole growing field in the psychedelic research. Is how do we support folks in different life stages and with more complicated diagnoses that may be interlinked with what they're facing, in this case, end of life, and sometimes depression at end of life, other things like that. So I know in that trial you worked as an independent clinical rater, and I wanted to ask you, since we have so many folks who are interested in the nuts and bolts of how these things work, could you tell me more about what an independent rater does and how you got involved in it, and if there's any standout memories that were a part of your experience on that trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about the way that a clinical trial is set up, we have lots of different parts that work together to try to get the most objective data possible. And so we have in the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy trials, we have the therapists who are doing rating scales at different time points. The patients are doing self-report scales. And then there's the role of the independent rater, who is, as the name suggests, an independent person that is not associated with the research organization or that the team. So the psychedelic therapist who are a part of a team. These are outside of that team. They aren't aware of where the participant is in the study. If they've had they're also blinded, so they don't know if the patient got placebo or if they got medicine. So the idea is that they are as independent as possible, and they also rate at different time points. The particular study that I worked on, I happened to be the only independent rater, so I had the good fortune of meeting all of the participants at almost all of the time points, which was a really unique experience for me to see the kind of dramatic changes in it from my subjective perspective, but to see the really drastic improvements that a lot of the patients had, and to really watch them evolve and grow through the process of having a course of MDMA therapy. And the study was designed a little bit differently than it is for the current phase 3 clinical trial. We have a whole pool of independent raters, and those raters are seeing different participants at different time points. You're not seeing the same participant, so it's really they've really done a lot to make sure that the data is even more objective than maybe in the past.
Oh, that's incredible. What was your experience like getting to meet all of the patients? Were there any memories you have about how people were doing, or sort of how they felt about their participation?
Yeah. One of the things that really stands out to me as I'm thinking back now is how these were people who had faced life-threatening illness, and maybe they were in remission from cancer, or maybe they had a different type of medical diagnosis that was maybe more terminal, or that they weren't in remission, but going through this process kind of renewed their vigor and their zest for life. They wanted to. There were people who did career changes, or started a new business, or were more able to connect with their families. And that really stands out to me, because these are people that had faced the possibility of death, and through their experience with MDMA psychotherapy, they were able to feel more connected to the lives that they had.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing more about it. I think, yeah, that the healing that folks experience on multiple levels that I read about in clinical trials, you know, physically, psychologically, and how sort of the energy that might come up when people experience some of that healing that lets them move forward is really, it's just always so heartening to get to hear more about it. So I appreciate you for doing that work and for telling us a little more about your experience there.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS, is one of two pretty well-known here in the US programs that many mental health practitioners are stepping into who want to enter the field of psychedelic medicine and therapy. The other one, the MAPS MDMA therapy training program, is another, of course, huge name in the space.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you have taught a course on psychedelic philosophy and the history of psychedelics for the philosophy program, graduate program at CIIS, which I am sure was a very popular class. And one question we always love to ask folks who come on the quick trip is, you know, a core message or a lesson or an idea that you want folks to think about in the field. And I wonder if there was anything from your teaching experience that you brought up in those courses you taught, or just from your own work as a practitioner, if there's any kind of message or lesson that you really hope students and practitioners can bring into their work as they do more in the psychedelic field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I thought about the course that I taught, which was a history of psychedelic medicine, my goal in that was to help situate the current psychedelic renaissance this current moment in this really deep history of context of humans using psychedelics for thousands of years, and to remember that we don't have to reinvent everything. That there's a lot that we can learn from what has been done, whether it be hundreds of years by indigenous groups, or there's so much to learn from the kind of first psychedelic renaissance in the 50s and 60s. So holding that context, I think it is really important, that we don't have to come up with everything on our own. That there's an interconnectedness, both currently across different populations, but interconnectedness with the past and into the future.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it is so important that we're learning from history and bringing that into the present, because there, as you said, there's so much knowledge and so many experiences and wisdom pieces that we really need to make sure we're connected to.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And so we're nearing the end of our time. I usually put the website where folks could connect with you. If that's, I don't know if that's the right info to share. I would love to just give you a chance if you'd like people to connect with you in any particular way. Yeah, we'd love to hear how that works best.
Yeah, you reach out through my website. I also have a public Instagram account that's at Emily Willow MD. Where I share a lot of public health information about psychedelics. That was kind of my goal in starting that Instagram account, was to share more information and kind of educational information about psychedelics. So yeah.
Oh, perfect. Great. I'll make sure we get that tagged in the blog as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for making time to share your insights with us. And I hope you have a great rest of the day.
All right. Thanks, you too.
Thank you.